Grab your jerseys and prepare yourself for an exhilarating adventure through time as we delve into the captivating history of the Rugby World Cup. From its humble beginning to its grandest stages, let's take a look at how the world's third largest sporting event got to where it is today. The Rugby World Cup had first been suggested as early as the 1950s. Harold Tolhurst, an ex-Australian international and referee, brought up the idea around that time, but nothing came of it. And in 1968, the IRB made it known that they did not want their unions partaking in a tournament like this. But by 1983, the IRB had a meeting about the concept of a World Cup, where Australia and then in 1984 New Zealand put forward plans to host an inaugural tournament. In 1985, after South Africa backed the World Cup, it passed an IRFB vote 10-6. Scotland and Ireland initially voted against the idea, and given Ireland's track record, maybe they were onto something. Teams play for the Webb Ellis Cup, which is named after the boy who supposedly picked up the ball while playing football and ran with it, thus inventing rugby. But this is widely regarded as nothing but a myth. However, it's still a fun story. It was a Victorian design of a 1740 cup made in 1906. The cup was bought from Gerard Cole in London and was chosen for its use as the Rugby World Cup trophy in February of 1987, which later that year would see the inaugural tournament kick off. The first World Cup took place in Australia and New Zealand, with 16 teams taking part. New Zealand hosted 21 of the 32, with Australia hosting the remaining 11. This World Cup did not involve any qualifying process like modern World Cups do. The first 7 were given to the eligible members of the IRFB, which were New Zealand, Australia, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales and France, with South Africa being excluded due to the ongoing sports boycott at the time. The other 9 players were filled by invitation. These teams were Argentina, Fiji, Italy, Canada, Romania, Tonga, Japan, Zimbabwe and the USA. Western Samoa were controversially overlooked, as they were considered a better side than many who were invited. An interesting thing about this World Cup is you actually gained 1 point for just turning up to the game. And this continued until 1999. New Zealand became the first ever Rugby World Cup champions by beating France 29-9 in the final. The next World Cup would take place in 1991 and would be hosted by all 5 nations teams, with the final taking place at Twickenham. And no, I'm not calling it HQ. This was the first World Cup in the Northern Hemisphere and also the first to include qualifying, as the number of entrants increased from 16 to 33. The 8 quarter-finalists of the previous World Cup qualified automatically, with the other 8 being made up from regional qualifying tournaments. Zimbabwe qualified from Africa, Italy and Romania from Europe, Western Samoa and Japan from Asia Pacific, and Canada, Argentina and the USA from the Americas. The 1999 World Cup was one to remember for many reasons. We saw Wales get knocked out at the group stage due to a massive upset where Western Samoa beat them 16-13. It's also the furthest that both Canada and Scotland have ever got at a World Cup, with the quarter-final and semi-finals respectively. And we saw the Southern Hemisphere teams maintain their dominance, with Australia beating England in the final at Twickenham to win their first World Cup. In 1992, South Africa played their first international rugby union match in 8 years, as their isolation had come to an end due to the end of apartheid policies. South Africa were selected to host the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which would also be the first World Cup that they would take part in. The new and first democratically elected black president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, saw the World Cup as an opportunity to unite the people of South Africa after the end of the apartheid regime. He befriended Springbok captain Francois Pienaar, and the two of them worked together to promote unity between black and white South Africans. They knew that hosting the World Cup could help in fostering unity, but nothing other than all-out victory would bring what was required. The pressure was immense. They would start strong by massively upsetting one of the tournament favourites by beating Australia 27-18 in the opening match. South Africa made it to the final of their World Cup, where they would meet a New Zealand team that had hosted superstar Jonah Lomu and had scored over 40 tries in the lead up to that final. South Africa would go on to win 15-12 after extra time, with Joel Stransky scoring a drop goal to win the match. Nelson Mandela famously entered the field wearing a Springbok jersey with the number 6 of Francois Pienaar on his back. The 1999 World Cup was the first World Cup since rugby became professional in 1995, and was also the first World Cup to involve 20 teams. This World Cup was hosted by Wales, but games were also played in England, Scotland, Ireland and France. Only 4 teams qualified automatically for this tournament. These were hosts Wales and the top 3 finishers at the 1995 World Cup of South Africa, New Zealand and France. Everyone else took part in qualifying tournaments. This World Cup is also the only one to have a quarter-final playoff that was played between second place and best third place teams. This was because they opted for 5 pools of 4 to accommodate the 20 teams. Australia won the 1999 World Cup by beating France 35-12 in the final in Cardiff, and became the first side to win the World Cup more than once. The 2003 World Cup was hosted by the reigning champions for the first time, Australia. After criticism of the complicated format of the previous World Cup, the tournament changed its format back to 4 pools, but to accommodate the 20 teams it was 4 pools of 5, with the top 2 progressing to the quarterfinals. This was also the first time a bonus point rule was added to the tournament, and you no longer received a point for just turning up. This World Cup would see the first time a Northern Hemisphere team won the tournament, with England beating Australia 20-17 with a famous last-minute drop goal from Johnny Wilkinson to clinch it at the death. France hosted the 2007 World Cup, with it being announced that some games would be hosted in the neighbouring Six Nations countries. Something that I found interesting is that Scotland didn't sell out either of their 2 games they played at Murrayfield, one of which was against the All Blacks. The stadiums chosen for this World Cup were far bigger than before. The smallest stadium could seat 33,000 people, compared to the 99 World Cup where the smallest was Netherdale with a capacity of 6,000. Argentina were standout performers in this World Cup, finishing top of what was dubbed the Pool of Death by beating hosts France and Ireland along the way. They also got past another Six Nations team by beating Scotland in the quarterfinals. Argentina would lose in the semi-final against South Africa, who would go on to win the World Cup by defeating England 15-6 at the Stade de France. Argentina finished third by once again beating France in the bronze final. Their performances at this World Cup led to them eventually becoming a member of Sanzar and joining the Rugby Championship from 2012. In 2011, the World Cup returned to New Zealand for the first time since the inaugural championship in 1987. It quickly became one of New Zealand's biggest ever sporting events, with over 130,000 visitors coming for the tournament. New Zealand hadn't won the World Cup since the very first, and were now lagging behind Australia and South Africa, who had both won too. The pressure was on for them to regain the World Cup in their own backyard. They would be successful in this by beating France in a thrilling final 8-7, but not every team in this tournament was successful. Scotland had not progressed to the knockout stages for the first time ever, and England did not get past the quarterfinals. But the bad times wouldn't stop there for England. England would host the next tournament, with a few games also being played at Cardiff, beating out Italy, Japan and South Africa for hosting rights. But that's where the good times would end for England. England would not progress to the quarterfinals, and got knocked out at the pool stage for the first time after losing to Wales and Australia. England gained an unwanted record for being the first host nation to drop out of the World Cup at the group stages, but this actually isn't true, as Wales were knocked out at the group stage in the 1991 World Cup, which they co-hosted. Many people were bigging up the Northern nations to challenge the Southern powerhouses, but none of them got past the quarterfinals. Scotland got the closest, as they were mere minutes away from making the semi-final, but a dodgy penalty call in the last minute saw Australia progress. New Zealand would retain their title by beating Australia 34-17 in the final. 2015 World Cup became known for many amazing feats, such as New Zealand becoming the first to go back-to-back and the first to win 3 World Cups, but it's probably most well known for the Brighton miracle. South Africa played the, at the time, rugby minnows Japan in their opening game of the championship, which was expected to be nothing but a routine victory for the Springboks. However, Japan won with a last-minute try to win only their 3rd World Cup match, 34-32 against the African Giants. This put Japan on the map in terms of Tier 1 Test rugby. They would go on to win 2 more games at that World Cup, but didn't make it out of the pool, becoming the first team to win 3 games and not do so. Japan would host the next World Cup in 2019, becoming the first Asian nation to do so, where they would go one step further than the previous year by topping their pool and reaching the knockout stages for the first time. They beat Ireland and Scotland in that pool and knocked Scotland out in the process, enacting their revenge on the only team to beat them in the 2015 World Cup. They were however unable to repeat their 2015 feat and got knocked out by the eventual champion South Africa in the quarterfinals, who would go on to comfortably beat England 32-12 in the final and match New Zealand's 3 World Cups. Funnily enough, even though they'd been to 2 previous finals, this was the first one where they scored a try. The 2023 Rugby World Cup will take place in France, and will be the 3rd time France has been involved in hosting the tournament. This World Cup has had massive criticism even before it's kicked off. This is due to the timing of the draw. The World Cup draw was made in December of 2020, nearly 3 years before the tournament took place. And due to COVID-19, they used the Rugby World Rankings from November of 2019, right after the previous World Cup had ended. This has meant that as of the time of recording, there are 3 teams in the top 5 of the World Rankings in the same pool, and the top seed in Pool C is currently ranked 9th. The next 2 World Cups beyond 2023 have already been decided, with 2027 World Cup being hosted in Australia and the 2031 World Cup in the USA. A funny thing about World Cups is that drop goals often become way more common than in the rest of the rugby calendar. This is obviously because of the stakes at risk. But did you know that under certain circumstances, drop goals are illegal? You can find out more about this by watching this video right here. Thanks for watching.